Hey,
Hey, good afternoon. How are you?
you ready for this?
I think so.
Chuck and Lila from our love seat. The discussion this afternoon actually, is really a kind of a challenging one. We wanted to talk to you about expectations. And as we discussed it and prayed about it, and we've realized it's a huge bowl of potpourri. It includes a lot of different angles of the relationship. And I think we were able to boil it down to the primary thing. And when in one of the tools that we use in our counseling assessment with couples is a prepare enrich assessment. And we realized, and we've done probably 150 of them, and we realized there was probably never one couple that didn't have an expectations issue. And it's an important thing to address before you get married, because you can be really disappointed after the honeymoon when you find out your spouse isn't measuring up. But we realized, and I was reading some funny things, that one thing said expectation.
Down, because I can see them.
Okay, now this is going to be on there.
That's okay. Just put your feet in. Because they kept getting in the... Okay, go ahead.
Expectations is really something that's evil. It causes evil. And it is a precursor to disappointment and frustration, because what the important thing about expectations, the critical thing about expectations is when they're unmet. So the thing that causes conflict and serious emotional issues is unmet expectations.
Is it ever? Expectations is really a difficult subject in marriage, and in keeping with our theme of going along with how a marriage lasts as long as it lasts. Expectations is one of the things that we need to come into the marriage with an understanding that we need to learn to be other-centered. Mm-hmm. There'll be times when you'll be extremely disappointed because your expectations of your spouse haven't been met. And we talked a little bit last week about how after the love and the infatuation wears off, you have to start to live with each other. You have to start to get to know one another. And the better we are at that intimate talk that we have every morning, the better we know each other. So in trying to understand what we're talking about here is when we get married, we have an idea of who that husband and who that wife should be, and the kinds of things that they're going to do for us and with us and help us to become. And very often there's things like unmet forgiveness, unforgiven things that have happened before, or things that are seem trivial, but it might just be that we don't do a good job of closing the door when we come in, or it may be that we don't pick up after ourselves, or we find our socks in 40 different places in the house. So the expectations that we're wanting to get to is that you learn to tolerate. You learn to become other-centered. Well, the first thing that we do is, and again, if we listen to what our vows say, which we very seldom do, if you listen to your vows, men, they usually will include something about dying to ourselves and meeting the needs of our wife and children as they come along. And so very often that requires us to be more understanding with the kinds of things that we'd like to do and the kinds of things that they'd like to do. And so...
I have a good point right here.
Okay, all right.
One of the things, a good way to start, I think, is to talk about realistic expectations and things that you can expect. And if you're in a healthy, two-partner, 100% engaged, healthy relationship, you can expect from that healthy relationship respect and kindness and gentleness and faithfulness. And those are things, because we were talking about trying to differentiate expectations and things that you count on from your loved ones. And the danger is, and Chuck made it, we talked about this a lot before we came on today because it's so difficult, but he made a good point in our discussion that our expectations and the things we can count on change through the years as we age, as our family structure changes. We have different expectations. And this young generation, the relationship, there's different expectations in young marrieds today, even married 10, 15 years, than what there was 50 years ago. Because, this might hurt your feelings, but...
Better not.
In the era that we got married in 1966, women weren't even identified by our own names. We were called Mrs. So-and-so. So the culture was entirely different. I grew up that men didn't change diapers. Men weren't engaged in the daily activities of raising the kids. And if I would have expected that, I'd have been a really unhappy girl because it would not have happened. But we were raised in the same culture, so I didn't have unrealistic expectations. And there's times when we talk with couples, and we've had this from guys a little bit, but it's mostly from the women that their husband just is not measuring up. There's certain things that, they expect a level of emotion out of their husband and a level of kinship and that kind of thing that really is a relationship you have with a girlfriend.
Sure.
Because you can't expect that level of
well, what's important,
emotion.
What's important to understand about that is that the two of you are getting married, and one of you sees green and one of you sees red. And you don't see things the same as each other.
Don't speak the same language.
You don't even speak the same language. And so what you have to learn to do, guys, is to understand the things that are important. I know one of the most difficult things for me in the early years was placing enough importance, enough response, and those kinds of things to the things that Lila liked to do, or that she'd do, and it's like coming home and you walk in the door and she's dressed up and she's going around the house like this, and you're supposed to figure out what it was that she's done wrong or different.
I would have said that was good.
so that you can compliment her on her hair that she changed, or a new dress or things of that nature. And so very early on, I realized that we as men, especially after we have kids, need to learn to be mind readers. And we need to be able to be sensitive enough to know what our wives need. Some of the things that were very successful for me over the years is I don't ever ask her anything about things she does to make herself look good. Getting her hair done, getting her nails done, cutting hair, buying dresses, things, even things in the house that she likes to do. And I don't get upset about it. I know it costs money, and I know she's always been very frugal about that, but she's not doing it for herself.
Right.
She's doing it for me. She's doing it so that she looks good, and when we go out, she gets to be the eye candy. And she gets to be the one that talks. And I love that, because then I don't have to say very much. And so I learned early on in our marriage that we need to let our women primp. We need to give them what they need, no matter, we don't want it to be unreasonable. And what we're trying to say here with expectations is that it's okay to have them. But what we need to learn to do, especially when we have kind of opposite thoughts, we need to learn to be other-centered. We need to be able to say, okay, well, it's like in an argument. None of us have ever been in an argument that we wanted to lose. And there, early on, again, in our marriage, I learned that it was better to lose or not continue in the argument, and to make peace, because
then nobody wins. If the argument goes on, it's a
right.
lose-lose.
And so you get to a place where you realize that it's a win-win, because the argument's done, you're enjoying yourself, and things are okay. And so I know that my wife has some more to say here.
And the biggest thing about expectations is expectations versus reality, because expectations is an arrow pointing that way. That's what you want. Reality is that you might get there that way. Mm-hmm. And when we focus so much, and we've talked with people who have had a lot of disappointing adult years because their parents didn't meet expectations. Well, you can't go looking in the graveyard for life. When your parents are gone and they didn't meet your expectations, the only tool that you have then is to improve that relationship with your own children. Mm-hmm. And you can live a victim on what did or didn't happen in your childhood, and then a lot of times for women, they'll have that same expectation that they had of their parents, and they're expecting that of a husband. That isn't your role. And next week, we're going to talk about love languages, and we're going to talk about how intimately knowing each other's love language allows you to communicate. But the reality of that is you have to come as two whole people to be able to have a whole, right, fulfilling, abundant relationship. Because if you haven't dumped luggage and baggage, and you're bringing it into this, and your spouse can expect not to have to battle your issues from your childhood. And if you need to talk to someone, talk to a doctor. Start with a doctor to see what your doctor would recommend, mm-hmm, because the bottom line is you're miserable. And nobody wants to be miserable, and it's a choice we're making by dwelling there.
Well, and it's what's important in that point is that as we go about life, the serious things in our marriage often are hard to give up. The serious things are often difficult to forgive. And
What does difficult to give up mean?
Things that we have done, or things that we would have liked to have done that we haven't been able to do, that we continue to harp on, that we continue to bring up in the relationship. And a lot of that, most of that is unforgiveness. And it's that we are speaking in a way...
Especially like if when we got married you told me you were going to be a brain surgeon.
Yeah.
And then you ended up a college dean. Brain surgeons make a lot more money than teachers do.
Right, and you don't expect that, you don't expect that kind of thing to happen. But what happens there is we begin to, unforgiveness gets in the way.
Right.
Unforgiveness.
With unmet expectations.
Right, with
What's
that
that
expectation.
Word? Yeah.
That word. And so what we need to learn to do is to be able to give and forgive and forget. And there's a whole hour or so that we could spend just on talking about how do I give up those things in which I'm unhappy about, or that I have an expectation for. Well, to start with, that expectation, whether it be between the two of you, or whether you're allowing your love circle to include other people's expectations,
Amen.
that are part of that, you find that those are hard to forgive. And when you don't forgive them, your thoughts are on them all the time,
Right.
to a point of to being
Misery.
beyond miserable.
And your heart's
Right.
kind of coveting then.
Right. And so what
You're
you
not
do,
content.
you're uncontent and incontent, whatever that
You're
that
not
word is.
content.
You're not content. And so what we need to realize is that we need to go to the Lord, and we need to sit at His feet, and we need to ask Him to help us forgive that person. It might be that you did something wrong or they did something wrong. It really doesn't matter. But
Especially if you're expecting them to come to you.
yeah, they're not going to
That's
come
not
to
gonna
you
happen.
they're not going to come to you and say I'm sorry. Most of the time that doesn't happen. But it's what a blessing it is when you see them come together. There's times when we've taken couples, and we would look at them and say, you tell her that you're sorry and you tell him that you're sorry. They hug and they kiss and it's all over. It's done. Because
If they're mature.
9 times out of 10 they can't remember what it was that they were arguing about or
Because
whatever.
it piles up.
So in this long-term relationship, we have to learn. Obviously, it's an other-centered concept, but we have to learn how to give up our expectations when it comes to somebody else, because the forgiveness is not for you. I'm sorry. The forgiveness is not for the person you're forgiving. God would tell you that the forgiveness is for you so that you can pay attention to Him and not dwell on the things that are not of his doing, or things that He wants you to do. And so it's important that you realize that unforgiveness keeps you
In bondage.
And again, is something we may talk a little bit more about. The other thing about unforgiveness is, and we won't have a lot of time to be able to talk about it a lot, but is involving our children and the things that we do with our children, and the discipline and the things that we talk about with them.
Don't do with them.
Or don't do with them. We need to know that they have the same advantage that we have, and that is that Jesus Christ forgives everything. He forgives everything. And as you discuss things with your children, they need to know that you'll discuss with them those things they've maybe done wrong, but that you'll let them go. that you'll let them go on their, down the road so that you can progress. The Lord told us to raise the children as we would have them go His way.
Deuteronomy 6.
Deuteronomy
Raise them up in the
brings
way
them up
they
in the
should
way that
go.
they should go, not the way that I think they should go, or
Right.
Mom should think they should go. If I did, I'd have a professional football player
And a doctor.
and a beauty queen.
No, a doctor.
So but
We have a beauty queen. What do you mean?
right. I know that, but I'm talking too much. But the point is that we need to be able to let people in our intimate circle know that they're the most important thing that's in our life, and that that our children and our wife should be first on our list.
So as they
Okay.
evaluate this, what would your challenge be to a self-evaluation to determine that a lot of what makes them unhappy is unmet expectations, and that's not reality?
Right.
So what would you...
I would want to make sure that they understood that the unmet expectations had to go away, and that it's okay because they can really were designed to do what God would have them to do, and it's not up to me as long as we can communicate that it's okay.
It's not up to you to be disappointed
Right.
if we don't do what you think we should.
Right. So, and it's time for us to wrap this up. But excuse me, but I think what's important for us in this session is that this can be a stumbling block to a successful marriage.
Yes.
We've seen more than one marriage fail because of the inability to be other-centered,
Right.
and especially when it comes to more serious things.
And if I'm disappointed in you, it's my fault. It's not your fault.
Right.
Okay.
Okay.
So, you want me to pray?
Yeah, please.
Oh, Father, be glorified as you reveal the truth to those who are listening, Lord. Empower them to set themselves free from the expectations, unmet expectations that aren't reality, Lord. And just love on them and comfort them until we are together again.
Yes.
Amen.
See you next week.